Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I'm Bill and this is the third of our 4 Quadrant Sourcebook reviews. Today we are talking about the Gamma Quadrant. So as always with our reviews, we use the alert system. Yellow alert for things to take note of, red alert for the things we think are really good, and the rarely used black alert for the things that are groundbreaking and game-changing. So without further ado, I'm jumping into the small window and we are going to take a look at the Gamma Quadrant Sourcebook. So we're going to, first of all, it starts in chapter 1 saying how the timeline for the sourcebook is moved to the year 2374. At this stage in the game being real life, this is, of course, first edition started off having its own timeline because of their living campaign. As we know now that everything that's been coming out recently is sort of timeline agnostic, and second edition, which is coming out later this year, is not going to have any particular timeline it's attached to. So this book, it was moving the game's standard timeline a bit forward to the year 2374, which is 1 year before the Dominion War ended. This book is going to be mainly about the stuff that you see in Deep Space Nine concerning the Dominion War and, of course, the Gamma Quadrant itself. So looking at chapter 2 is called the Gamma Quadrant, which makes perfect sense. So Gamma Quadrant chapter is going to talk about the Dominion primarily, and this is a massive resource of information about the Dominion. It goes on the history of the founders. It goes into the Herc War, changelings, the Great Link, Vorta, what else? The Jem'Hadar, the Dre, Tosk, all of these different species that popped up through Deep Space Nine that came through the wormhole from the Gamma Quadrant. There's little sections about them in here talking about pretty much each and every one of them. It goes into the culture of the Dominion, what it means to have membership, be a member world in the Dominion, their science, their technology, starships, genetic engineering, which of course plays a huge role because of the Jem'Hadar. All of this information, it is so in depth. If you need a resource for the Dominion, for the Dominion War, the changelings, founders, Jem'Hadar, everything, this is your encyclopedia for that. So this chapter, there's a lot of information, and of course I'm just introducing what's in there. You should really take a look if you are interested in that for your campaign or even for your own personal interest in Star Trek. As usual, there's a lot of sidebars throughout this entire book, as is the case with all of the Star Trek Adventures products, and especially the earlier products. There is a lot of information in these sidebars that are great for setting the tone and also giving ideas like plot hooks and story ideas. There was one really interesting sidebar, at least with sort of like a Dominion news program or a Dominion social media type program that is very interesting. And again, if you want some ideas to flesh out what the Dominion is like and to kickstart some ideas for your game, really dive into the sidebars in all of these books, especially these early ones, these early Quadrant books. So much information in there, so much creative information there. After the introduction to Dominion and what the polity of the Dominion is like, it goes into describing some of the Dominion worlds. I'm not going to get into all of them. There's just a short write-up on a number of them, but the ones that stand out, of course, are the Founders' home world, where the changelings are, and the Great Link exists. The Herc outpost, where the Sword of Kahless was found. What else there? The Penal Moon, where Martok and Worf and Dr. Bashir were locked up by the Dominion when they were captured. And of course, a few others here and there. But I think those are the main ones. Again, if you're running a campaign, there's so little information about the Gamma Quadrant. So you can imagine there's not a lot of huge in-depth extra material that you don't have in Deep Space Nine, but they really do make good use of what they have and make sure everything is explained and presented in a way that makes it captivating and interesting. That there's a lot of ideas of how you can incorporate it into your stories and into your games. The last part, maybe not the last part, the next part in this chapter goes into breaking down like who are the allies of the Dominion. For example, the Cardassians, the Breen, which I think a lot of people will have more interest in now, thanks to Season 5 of Star Trek Discovery, going deeper into the Breen than we've ever seen before. But this is the first major description and appearance in Star Trek Adventures. So if you're interested in the Breen, this is the book for you. The Son-A from Star Trek, was it Insurrection? The third next generation movie, actually. The Orions, Miradorn, and a couple more. It goes into potential allies for the Dominion, such as the Tholian Assembly, the Gorn, and again, Strange New Worlds. They're bringing Gorn to the forefront, and the Nausicaans. Why potential allies? Because again, this is at the time when Star Trek Adventures was holding on to its timeline. The Dominion War is not over yet. That's why it's set 1 year before, so you have a lot of information, you have a lot of material featured in the Dominion War, but it's still not finished yet, so you could jump your story, your campaign, your game into the middle of the war. Again, nowadays it doesn't really matter because there is no timeline attached to anything. But back then that was sort of the purpose, or at least I'm assuming. And also Dominion enemies. So after allies, Dominion enemies. So the Talarians, the Niberite, Ferengi, and the First Federation. Again, another interesting choice. The next part is about the Dominion War itself, and I am giving this a red alert. This is, as I said before with the talk about the Dominion itself, this is an encyclopedia entry in great detail, massive detail about the war, everything leading up to the first encounters, the beginning of the war, going into the war, and everything that broke out from that point forward. There is so much information in this part. If you want to set your game during this time period while the war is going on, or pretty much any point in the war timeline, this is going to be the one-stop resource you need. I know when the Federation-Klingon tactical campaign was released, many people wanted to adapt it to the Dominion War. This is what you need to do that. This is going to give you all the ideas, the locations, the places, the people, everything involved, so you can make your own assets for that tactical campaign, so you can flesh out the story the way you like, so you know where you can put your campaign, your characters, your ship into the Dominion War to have the most impact, or to explore one of the little corners that was mentioned, that was heard, that was seen, but not really fleshed out on screen. There is so much that you can pull out of here. And they have the sidebars. Again, the sidebars, always amazing in here. Sidebars talk about how to have role-playing during the wartime, how to set campaigns during the Dominion War. You put this hand in hand with the information of running a war in the tactical campaign, you are going to have a beautifully crafted, fleshed out, fully formed war campaign ready to go with those two books together, Gamma Quadrant and the tactical campaign. This is, honestly, it's impressive the amount of information. It felt like the old Star Trek encyclopedia, but this is an entire chunk only about the Dominion War and everything about it in almost excruciating detail. I loved it. It was very good, and I know some people might be saying, yes, but this book is 1 year before the war ends, so it doesn't really have everything. Technically it does. So yet again, the sidebars. It does have a sidebar acknowledging that yes, the war clearly ended on the TV show decades ago. So it gives you a sidebar with the major points going to the end of the war. So if you were to set your game in this time period, back when Star Trek Adventures had the time period, and you want to play the war out to the end, it still gives you those resources, while the main book itself is written in universe in the year 2374. You're still going to get the information to carry you through 2375 and the conclusion of the war. So yes, it does include the entire war here for you to use at your leisure. So next chapter is chapter 3. Yes, that was all in chapter 2. So stand down, Red Alert. Chapter 3 is Species of the Gamma Quadrant. And here's where we're going to get all of the different species, races of mainly characters that we saw, or mainly the groups that we've seen in the Gamma Quadrant themselves. They have and here's where I butcher all of the pronunciations because I'm not that familiar with all of them. There are Grathi, I believe. The changelings themselves, you could look them up, create a character about them. The Dosi, the Dry, or the Dre, I believe. The Karenima, I believe it is. The Lurians, the Paradins, the Rakari, the Skreya, Sona, from, again, Insurrection, the Tosk, and the Wadi. So those are the different species that you got. And this is also very early source book. This is before the player's guide, so it's going to give you some advice on how to play non-Starfleet characters back in the time when you could really only make Starfleet characters. So you got some information that, but of course, if you want more detail, if you want to know how to flesh out a fully non-Starfleet campaign character, whatever, the player's guide is where you are going to want to look. Chapter 3. Next is Chapter 4, which is Starships of the Gamma Quadrant. Starships of the Gamma Quadrant includes mainly Dominion starships. So you have the Jem'Hadar battleship, the Karenima cruiser, Vorta explorer, Sona flagship, Sona battle cruiser, Dominion dispatch vessel. Those are the main ones, but then they also has a section on the notable starships of the war. Again, tactical campaign, you're crafting assets, you want to have Dominion-based assets. Here are the notable big-name starships of the war that you will want to use in your tactical campaign. There is things like the USS Galaxy, the Prometheus class. If you want the information on that, you get there. Of course, you can find it elsewhere, but here's where it first appeared. USS Sutherland, the USS Lakota, the USS Valiant, USS Majestic, the Katinga refit of 2366, and the Diderdex refit. There's also a section that I'm giving a yellow alert to because I know there's a lot of players out there that love this kind of stuff. The Frankenstein fleet. There's sidebar rules on how to make your kit-bashed ships from the Frankenstein fleet, where it takes nacelles from one ship, saucer section from another, the hull of another ship, and you're just piecing together ships to just keep sending them out. Ships get destroyed, damaged. Can't use that, but this part's good, so they just mash a ship together. They kit bash it and make it. So there are rules for how to kit bash a ship for this Frankenstein fleet. Really interesting stuff, and I know there's a lot of players out there that love and they dig that stuff. If you're a Star Trek Online player, you're pretty much familiar with doing that because you have all the nacelle swaps and the saucer swaps for different types of ships, the classes of ships they have. So you get the rules for doing that kind of customization here in the Gamma Quadrant Sourcebook. Last chapter is chapter 5. This is Encounters and Adversaries. And as I mentioned in the previous, not Gamma Quadrant, this is the only one, the previous Quadrant source books, this includes adventure hooks or I don't know what they're called, like mission seeds, whatever. These are what I describe as the prototypes for the mission briefs that came down the line for Star Trek Adventures and now are very big, and you could get them for free on the Modiphius stores. They're found in a lot of the later products, but these give you seed ideas for running or just creating spontaneously running an adventure, or adding some elements from these regions, from these scenarios into your games. The main one, I think some of the more interesting ones for me, the Bajoran wormhole and orbs get described in this chapter. You get a lot of information about the orbs that are known, what are known about the wormhole aliens, and of course the wormhole itself. Then there are Gamma Quadrant encounters to just, again, like I said, they're little mission seeds, little prototype mission briefs that appear later. So you could take a lot of story hooks, story ideas, throw them in. Front line, again, we're going back into, if you want tactical campaign, if you want to run into war, here are some ideas, story ideas for that war, and you could take these for your hotspots in the tactical campaign. Take these ideas there popping up through there to help flesh out your campaign. This is really, years later now, thanks to that tactical campaign, this book really shines in that regard. And you also get major NPCs that you can use. You could get stats for some of the big names: Martok, Kai Wynn, oh my god, who wouldn't want Kai Wynn in their game? Gul Dukat, Weyoun, the founder, leader, and also it talks about the morphogenic virus in the sidebar. So again, this is your complete guide to the Dominion War and everything surrounding it from Deep Space Nine. Now, that's the end. That's the end of the review. That's pretty much what's in there. I hope that conveys the content that you are going to experience accurately. But I'm going to say something that's contradictory, which is pretty normal for me, but might be confusing to some. I would say that if there's one book from the entire Star Trek Adventures line, first edition, that you, let's just say in this scenario, you want to buy every single Star Trek Adventures book that's out there except for one, I would say this is the book you don't buy. And the reason being is the scope is extremely limited. And of course, you can use everything, every element, any idea, any story hook, any species, whatever, in any game, any timeline, any situation you want. That's a given. That's natural. But as it stands as a source book, this book, the Gamma Quadrant Sourcebook, the scope is extremely limited to basically those events surrounding the war in Deep Space Nine, with a few exceptions. There's very little else that applies to most other games. If you're not going to be playing in the Gamma Quadrant, if you're not going to be playing during the Dominion War, this isn't going to give you the most amount of information. It's not going to give you the biggest bang for your dollar. So if there was one book you were not going to buy from the entire first edition lineup, I would say, because they're all great, including this one, I would say hold off on this one because its scope is probably the most limited out of everything that's out there so far. With that said, I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend this book in particular to just fans of Star Trek. Like I said, contradictory. Highly recommended, but the information you get, the detail this book goes into about the war, about the Dominion themselves, it is a fascinating read. For me, as a Trekkie, not just a Star Trek Adventures player, as a Trekkie, I love this book. I loved reading every page, every detail, every little sidebar, every in-universe little thing they put into this book. I enjoyed it immensely, and I would love if other Trekkies experienced it and read the knowledge that is located in here. It's an amazing book, highly recommended, but if there's one book you're not going to buy, you want to just, for whatever reason, not buy a single book out of the entire lineup, I would recommend not buying this one, as I'm also recommending buying it. So this is least recommended due to its very limited scope, but highly recommended for the lore, for the content, and just for your own satisfaction as a Trekkie. But with that also said, if you are going to do your Dominion War campaign, which a lot of people want to do because of the tactical campaign coming out there, then there's no better book in the entire STA lineup for you than this one. And that's it. That's my confusing review. So thank you for watching. As always, we got one more Quadrant Sourcebook to go, and that'll be coming up soon ish, hopefully. But as always, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life.